نور على نور.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. Eid Mubarak, kun aam antum b'alf khair. Hope everyone is well on this occasion, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We're very, very lucky to have and very grateful to have Sidi Peter Abdul-Adheem Sanders with us here today. We are looking forward to his talk, inshallah. He will be giving us on the topic of the Zāwiyah through the lens of his photography, his work. Before we begin, I'd just like to give a quick introduction to our initiative, Shajarat al-Nur, or the Tree of Light. Bismillah. Shajarat al-Nur is dedicated to reviving traditional cognitive frameworks embedded and influenced by the science of the heart, or ihsan. We draw inspiration from spiritual cultivation to respond to contemporary challenges while remaining grounded and connected through pursuing excellence and knowledge. Our mission at Shajarat al-Nur is to illuminate the path to the traditional sciences through engaging talks and live events led by renowned scholars and experts. In this virtual interactive talk centered on the theme of Suhba, or companionship, we will explore the pivotal role of the Zāwiyah, or the communal center, in fostering spiritual growth within the Islamic tradition. Renowned photographer Peter Abdul-Adheem Sanders will guide us through a visual journey with his captivating photographs and personal experiences of Zāwiyahs in Morocco and in Libya. We will explore the enduring influence of these establishments and their evolving roles in contemporary Islamic societies. By examining historical precedents and modern iterations, we aim to reveal how these ancient wellsprings of spirituality can guide and shape our response to today's complex challenges, drawing from their timeless wisdom and creativity. Peter Abdul-Adheem Sanders is the world's preeminent photographer of the Muslim world. For over 55 years, he has captured more than 500,000 images that reflect a rich traditional civilization filled with warmth, humanity, and compassion. His exemplary work and initiatives earned him a place among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. He serves as a permanent ambassador for MOSAIC, a charity established by His Royal Highness King Charles. Sanders traveled the world to meet and photograph saints and sages of Islam, publishing his work in books such as Meeting with Mountains, Encounters with Saints and Sages of the Islamic World, and Exemplars of Our Time with Michael Sugic. He is currently finalizing his book, Heaven, Earth, and the 10,000 Things, the Lives of the Muslims in China. And inshallah, Sidi Peter, after today's session and after we conclude with our Q&A, we'll look forward to hearing a bit more about your upcoming book. But without any ado, inshallah, we'd love to put the spotlight on you, Sidi Peter, and we look forward to your talk. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much, Hamza. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As Hamza said, I'm going to feature mostly the Zāwiyah of Sidi Imam al-Habib, which was the first Zāwiyah I ever went to, and which a place I spent a lot of time, and I got to know the inhabitants quite well. And it was my first experience of a Zāwiyah. I'd been to India previously and been to ashrams, but it wasn't the same experience, and I'll go into it. Really, the Zāwiyah is the abode of the Shaykh and his fuqara. As I said, the first Zāwiyah I ever visited was in Meknes in Morocco. Born in 1871, in Fez, Sidi Muhammad Habib established his Zāwiyah in 1936 as a place for learning and teaching the practices which lead to the purification of the heart and the knowledge of God. He was 65 when he opened his Zāwiyah, an age when most men retire. And in 1971, this venerable scholar saint still resided over his Zāwiyah. And he had now reached his century, 100 years age. And unknown to us, this would be his final year on the earth. That iconic meeting that I had with him when I climbed the stairs to meet him for the first time and take his picture, I would say transformed my life, although at the time I never really understood how significant it was. His seal with which he signed his letters read, "It is the will of God. There is no strength but through God." MashaAllah, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. His entire character was a reflection of these two great truths, and he looked at all creation with immense compassion. He was outer peace, inner peace, and peace itself. The Zāwiyah is often hidden, an anonymous place, like the people who inhabit them. It is often a refuge from the busy world. So the entrance to Sidi Muhammad Habib Zāwiyah, there were two entrances. This is one from the side of the park, and it's like an anonymous door. You would never know that inside the Zāwiyah was there. And the other one, the other side, you come to it down past the Shamasi Tuna Mosque, and you come down small alleyways until you can't go any further. And then again, there's an anonymous door that side of it as well. Often when you enter the Zāwiyah of the Habibiyya Daqawiyah, the fuqara there would recite this qasida of welcome. Greetings, the people of protection, wherever they may be. Blessed be they and how excellent their abode. For them the guardian Lord has manifested sons of his splendor. Would that my cheek were their sandal in the dust. When, dear brothers, will one come with good news of your arrival, that we might rejoice and be united? Let me be among you, even as I am. For though I'm not worthy of being among you, still you are worthy. Peace be upon you, and may Allah ennoble your rank, and may grace and joy always be yours. Days are only sweet if they contain your mention, and you are the radiance of my eye and its light. When my eye beholds the faces of my beloveds, that is my prayer offered in the nights of yearning. Faces which, when their beauty is unveiled, illuminate the world in all directions. And this is always sang when you arrive at gatherings, or if you arrive at the Zāwiyah, if the fuqara are present. Literally translated from the Arabic, Zāwiyah means corner. Usually it is where the sheikh lives with his family, but it is also a sacred space and an abode for the devout, also known as the impoverished ones, fuqara. This is it's very difficult to translate the word fuqara, but this is as near as we can get. Impoverished ones, due to their spiritual neediness and reliance of God, praying, studying, and living a simple, disciplined life. They serve visitors when they arrive. Often on Thursday nights, the sheikh's followers gather together to remember God. With the sheikh's guidance, these nights become the stage for spiritual openings. The Zāwiyah then becomes what the Sufi poets call a tavern of the spirit. If you allow the stillness of this space to enter your heart, you will begin to notice the hidden secrets of that sacred space. One of the first people I met in the Zāwiyah was Hajj Jalali, and if you ever visit the Zāwiyah, he's buried next to Sidi Muhammad Habib. Hajj Ali was one of the closest companions of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib. He was a wealthy man, and to purify his wealth, his Sheikh ordered him to feed 40 people every day for the rest of his life. This he did without fanfare. We were guests at his table many times. He would always sit quietly to the side and make sure that we were well fed. His many other acts of overwhelming generosity went unnoticed and unrecorded. Whatever he did for the face of God, and he displayed no interest in the world. Everything he did was for others. And I remember in the Zāwiyah, sometimes there wouldn't be any food in the Zāwiyah, and he would turn up and just, I don't know, instinctually know, and he would just take us to his house and feed us there. This is him with some of the international visitors posing with him, including a young Habib Mohammed Abu Bakr Bashwaib, of those who know him. There's a man from Fez and England and a man from Iran. So you can tell it was a very international group that came to the Zāwiyah. Imam Abdul Wahab, he was the Imam of the Zāwiyah, and I called him the guardian of the books and his heart. Sidi Abdul Wahab was the Imam of the Zāwiyah of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib. He led the 5 daily prayers in the Zāwiyah, and he gave discourses on religious sciences and advised the fuqara on points of sacred law and on the spiritual path. He was fastidious about his attire, a melancholic man who lived a regulated and austere life. He was rich in knowledge and bereft of the enticements of the world. Between times of prayer and remembrance, Imam Abdul Wahid would retire alone to his humble room in the Zāwiyah, furnished with a simple mattress on the floor and shelves overflowing with books of knowledge. A friend told me that he once sat beside Imam Abdul Wahab as they had a meal together. The Imam, while clearly enjoying his food, kept repeating under his breath, "I ask forgiveness of God, I ask forgiveness of God, I ask forgiveness of God." For most of us, when food appears, God disappears. And my friend realized that this saint remained in God's presence, regardless of the circumstances. The nightingale who sang for God, Sidi Hamid. Sidi Hamid was the nightingale of the Zāwiyah, raised from childhood by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib. He grew up in an atmosphere of worship and remembrance. He studied the gracious Quran, and his strong, lilting voice was ravishing, clear, and incredibly sweet. He sat beside his Sheikh and recited passages from the book, the Quran, upon which Sheikh Ibn Habib would make commentary. When the fuqara gathered to sing from the diwan, Sidi Hamid's mellifluous voice soared above the others, an outpouring of pure ecstasy. Sidi Hamid lived a normal life with a large and beautiful family. He earned his living as a civil servant. He was clean-shaven and dressed in a suit for work. He was modern for his time, but in the Zāwiyah he became his true self. Dressed in the traditional jalaba, his voice was timeless, the rapturous expression of the oneness of God. When I first went to the Zāwiyah, I had just come back from India, and at first I found the fuqara extremely austere. I mean, they were very majestic, as you can see from Faqih Mulli Abdul Salam. But as I got to know them, I realized they had incredible, sweet hearts, really. The majesty was all on the outside, but inside they were gold, I titled this one, "The One Who Found Sweetness in Pain." Despite the daunting outward appearance of many of the fuqara who withdrew from the world to remember God in the Habib Zāwiyah, I quickly learned that their big hearts overflowed with mercy. Mulli Abdul Salam was one such incarnation of gentle compassion making me feel at home in this new, unfamiliar world. One day I found him leaning against one of the pillars in the Zāwiyah, clutching his stomach in agony. But even in his terrible pain, all he saw was God's mercy, repeating over and over again, Alhamdulillah, praise be to God in all states. Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. Praise be to God in all states. He just kept on saying this. This was the way he dealt with incredible pain, was just seeing it being from God. It was a really very powerful lesson. Sidi Khalifa, I called him the one who found happiness in owning nothing. Blind and penniless, Sidi Khalifa would come to the Zāwiyah 5 times a day to make the call to prayer. Always happy and content, the extent of his poverty in this world would shock most people, but his wealth in the next world would amaze us all. You know, there's this hadith from the Prophet ﷺ saying, if you were to rely on God as he should be relied on, he would provide for you as he provides for the birds who leave home hungry in the morning and return in the evening fed. This is the state of people like Sidi Khalifa. It is an utter dependence on God. I returned to Maknes in 2017, and I was walking through the old town when I noticed a jalaba-clad blind gentleman walking towards me. Something about him reminded me of the Zāwiyah caretaker, Sidi Ali, but I knew that Sidi Ali had already passed away 9 months previously. Next, I thought of Sidi Khalifa, but was it possible? It was 45 years since I had photographed him. I raced after the man to satisfy my curiosity. He was maneuvering himself unaided like a person with eyesight. When he acknowledged being the Sidi Khalifa, you can imagine my amazement. Now at the stately age of 84, with a daughter about to be married, he asked about many people from those early visits. God had crossed our paths again, so I took the opportunity to re-photograph him. He agreed to meet me in the Zāwiyah later, and when he stood serenely as I took the new portrait, I remember thinking, we live such different lives, but for a few moments I re-entered his world.
Mute.
This is Hajj Muhammad. I called him the lost soul who became a man of the way. With the departure of his regular driver, Sidi Muhammad Habib asked his fuqara to help him find a replacement. After looking throughout Maknes, they returned saying, there is one very good driver, but you wouldn't want him. Why? Asked the sheikh. He's a degenerate sinner, they explained, a drunkard who lives in a brothel. Find him and bring him to me, the sheikh told them. The man who shared the sheikh's name, Muhammad, appeared sheepishly before the great saint, with his eyes lowered in guilt. The sheikh offered to hire him immediately on the condition that he refrained from drinking while serving him, saying, I don't like the smell of alcohol. The driver agreed and took the job. He began working for the sheikh, driving him to circles of remembrance, mosques, the homes of the fuqara, and celebrations of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Celebrations of the Prophet Muhammad's birth and the tombs of the saints. He spent every day with one of the greatest living saints of the age, completely sober. Gradually, he began joining the ritual prayers and then the circles of dhikr. Finally, he turned up at the Zāwiyah door, asking to stay there. It turned out that he had been keeping his daily prayers in the brothel, and so they threw him out. When Sheikh Muhammad ibn Habib died, his driver was devastated. Like a man shipwrecked, proximity to the sheikh had transformed this lost soul into a man of the way. the one whose giant heart was intoxicated with God, Mulli Hassan al-Baghaiti Maknes. He was known as Mulli Hassan al-Mushdub. Sufis use the Arabic term Mushdub to designate an aesthetic saint, one intoxicated in his attraction to God. Mulli Hassan crocheted and sold woolen hats for a living. He sold them for a few dirhams, but somehow he managed to support a large family. He used to say that the making of the hats was his shaking of the date palm, his substance being taken care of by God. The Quran says in the chapter of Maryam, tells how she was overcome by the pangs of giving birth to Sayyidina Isa, to Jesus, while alone in the desert. As she rested under the palm tree, God inspired her to shake it. Miraculously, fresh dates fell down from the tree to feed and comfort her. The Sufis use this as a simile for turning to God in prayer and remembrance when in need. If you ever took him a present, he would exclaim, God's postman has just arrived. And he never went to the Zāwiyah. He hardly went anywhere. We would always visit him at his home. This is him with his family. Being in the company of someone like Mulli Hassan was like being near an open radio that is constantly picking up new signals, from difficulties looming on the horizon to the thoughts in your heart. So you had to be careful where your mind wandered when you were with him. When he recited the Quran, it was often the chapter of Sayyidina Yusuf. I could feel the force of it passing through him like a tidal wave. His recitation would produce in his listeners a feeling of awe that was physical as well as spiritual. It is said that half of the world's beauty was given to the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and Mulli Hassan's preference for reciting that specific chapter of the Quran was fitting, as he was an exceedingly beautiful character. Visitors to his house were always served large, delicious Moroccan meals. And one day, a group of us were sharing a meal of couscous with him. After all had eaten their fill, there was still a large amount of couscous on the plate. Mulli Hassan then proceeded to make a series of large balls of the grain in the palm of his right hand. One by one, he gave a portion to each person present, and as he did, so he mentioned a deep insight into their character or predicted something about their future. All of them turned out to be true. Mulli Abu Qasim, I called him the otherworldly. Mulli Abu Qasim was otherworldly. I only ever heard him speak about two things: paradise and the day of gathering. Whenever we made to leave the Zāwiyah, he would always ask us where we were going. If we replied that we were heading to a gathering to sing from the diwan or to visit the mosque, he would come with us. But if we were headed to the marketplace, he would stay behind. The luminous spiritual beauty of this quiet and ethereal fakir was so palpable that all I wanted to do was to sit in his presence, never managing to ask to take his photograph. Years later, I discovered this beautiful photo taken by my gifted friend John Gulliver, Abdul-Adheem Gulliver. We knew nothing about Mulli Abu Qasim's personal life. We didn't really need to. He would always turn up at precisely the right moment, whenever we needed a spiritual gift or an uplift. His appearance was always like medicine for my heart. I was aware that he was from the village of Itza. Many years later, after he had passed away, I happened to be near Itza and took a detour to see the birthplace of this truly great man of God. I'm not sure what I expected, but what I found was an anonymous collection of concrete structures, nothing more but a stark reminder that God sometimes buries his treasures in the most unprepossessing places, hidden from the world. The lumberjack who fell for God, Fakir Sidi Ali. He was a beautiful example of one in a constant state of remembrance. Sidi Ali rang the Zāwiyah in Meknes after the death of his sheikh, after the death of Sidi Muhammad Habib. In his youth, he had worked as a lumberjack. A tree had fallen on him, putting him into a coma, in which Sidi Muhammad Habib appeared to him. And in the vision, the sheikh taught Sidi Ali his famous litany of prayers, his wird. Sidi Ali had recited it daily ever since. With his slight disfigurement and his eyesight almost gone, this joyful man had no regular income, but lived totally dependent upon God. He even mastered a few words of English. Whenever I visited him, he would say to me in his thick accent, "Drink tea, eat a lot, sleep a lot, and wake up shwiya, wake up little." A comment revealing impressive insight into the type of person I am, although it took me 40 years to decipher the layers of wisdom in his words. I'm someone that tries to not sleep a lot and tries not to eat a lot, but he was telling me, that's your medicine, that's your spiritual medicine for the path. And he said it, and people used to laugh thinking he was just joking, but there was deep wisdom in what he was saying to me. Sidi Ali was one of those men whose religious practices led to a deep understanding of the science of the soul, allowing him to give advice tailored precisely to the constitution of the person he addressed. His knowledge was not intellectual, but rather the result of intense spiritual training. Having learned to be in harmony with the world, he had the gift of reading people's hearts like open books. Due to his appearance and circumstances, he was someone who the modern world would have easily dismissed. I'm grateful that he was a consistent presence on my trips to Morocco for the last 40 years. On one of the more recent trips to Meknes, I asked him to take me to the Friday prayer, as I didn't know where the mosque was. He laughed at the idea of a blind man being anyone's guide. Despite his disability, however, he led me expertly through the winding streets of the old city until we reached the mosque. After finishing the prayers, I saw him standing outside. He looked as if he was begging. So I walked over quietly and I put a few coins into his hand, and then I returned to the Zāwiyah. Half an hour later, he arrived asking, "Where did you go?" I said to him, "I thought you were working," meaning, I thought he was, because he had no income at all. There's no social security in Morocco. So the only money he ever had was given to him. So I said to him, "I thought you were working." He said, "I wasn't working. I was waiting for you." And I realized then that I had imposed my own presumptions on this man, completely misunderstanding the situation. Here was someone spending his time and energy, despite his blindness, to serve me as a host and a guide. And I had assumed, because of his impoverished circumstances, that he needed to put the search for substance above the honor of serving a guest. His greatest priority, I learned, was pleasing God and serving his creatures. As the years passed, despite his continual poverty, Sidi Ali became more dignified, even stately in his demeanor. I was devastated when I received the news of his passing at the beginning of 2017. He has left a space in my life, and my trips to Morocco will not be the same without him. And I was told recently that he died on the bus going to the desert. And when they looked in the bag, all that was in there was his shroud. He must have known that he was dying and he wanted to go back to be with his family. These people, you cannot measure them because by worldly standards, they are insignificant. Really, I used to think he was a prince, really. The one who wept at the grave as he remembered, Muhammad Binani Beta from Fez. I met this saint in the 1990s while visiting the Zāwiyah of Sidi Muhammad Habib. Slightly intoxicated in his states, he occasionally burst into song, singing the Sheikh's poems of love and the spiritual path. His states changed like the weather. One evening, sitting by the tomb, he told us that during the last few minutes of his father's life, his father sat up and turned to him saying, "Remember God." His father then lay down and died. After relating this story, Muhammad burst into tears. Yusuf ibn Muhammad bin Nami, like father, like son. The son of Muhammad Banani Beta, this simple man smiled continuously. Many years after taking his father's picture, I returned to the Zāwiyah and saw Yusuf. I mistook him for his father. With the passing of time, their appearance had become very similar. After we spoke for a while, I realized my mistake and I told him the story his father had told me. And when I finished relating the story, Yusuf wept just as his father had wept. The lady whose eyes were fixed on paradise, Layla Fatima. She was one of the wives of Sidi Muhammad Habib. An important part of the infrastructure of the Zāwiyah lies with the women. Often hidden away from view, they organize many things behind the scenes and produce meals for the fuqara, who would often arrive unexpectedly and at inconvenient hours. During my later visits, Sidi Muhammad Habib's widow, Layla Fatima, would always appear from behind the Zāwiyah large wooden door, welcoming me and asking about the well-being of my family and friends. I was always amazed by how much she resembled Sidi Muhammad Habib. There was a softness about her like that of the Sheikh. She had walked her own path towards overcoming the ego and was a saint in her own right. A lifetime of companionship seemed to have blurred the lines between them. In her, one could see, even many years after Sidna Sheikh's passing, the fusion of the two souls. Aware that there were so few women in my book, Meetings with Mountains, in 2004, I sent a message asking if I could have permission to photograph the surviving wives of Sidna Sheikh. To my surprise, they agreed. However, I was unable to make the trip until 2006, when I suddenly felt an urgent impulse to go to Meknes. I arrived with my wife, who promptly disappeared into the women's domain. She returned, uncertain whether we would get a photograph, as Layla Fatima was very, very ill. Miraculously, she was much better the next day, and as I entered the women's area and looked into her eyes, I saw someone who was inwardly already in paradise. Despite her frail health, she welcomed us warmly, asking about our children and our mutual friends as she moved out into the courtyard to sit before my camera. Within 6 weeks, I received the news that she had left this world. The humble servant of the Zāwiyah, Layla Zulaika. She was the second wife of Sidi Muhammad Habib. Layla Zulaika had been the youngest of the Sheikh's wives, was from Algeria. We sat with this great lady in a small room where she had little more than a thin mattress on the floor and a small butane gas tank. She used to make us tea. The room felt more like a camp than a residence, reflecting the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ words on the fleeting nature of this life. I am in this world like a traveler who takes shelter in the shade of tree before resuming his journey. Getting time to sit in her presence was an immense honor, as the women of the household assumed the value of service and humility as adeptly as the men, if not more so, and she was often busy serving the community. She did this quite anonymously, often cooking food for people who never saw her, embodying the belief that fame and reputation are as dangerous a distraction from life's true goal as material luxury. In October 2017, I visited Meknes with a good friend who had never had the opportunity to travel to Morocco. Since he had a history of heart problems, I was concerned for his well-being, but he was keen to visit, and we timed it so that he could be back in London for yet another heart operation. I really wanted him to experience the Habibia Zāwiyah, and as we entered, Layla Zuleika, the last surviving widow of Sidna Sheikh, was sitting by his tomb. As soon as she saw my friend, she said, "I've been waiting for you. I've seen you 7 times before." She immediately put her hand on his heart and started praying for him. This was the first time they had ever met in this world. And afterwards I thought, this could have been like the pre-op before the operation awaiting him back home. 9 weeks later after this meeting, Layla Zuleika was laid to rest next to her husband in the Zāwiyah. For me, her passing was the end of an era, but I'm truly grateful to have had this last meeting with her in this world. This is another Zāwiyah in Meknes. It's called Sheikh al-Kamal. It's a slightly different Zāwiyah. It's, Sid Imam Habib's was a really poor and simple Zāwiyah. So there is a section in the book called Places Where the Lovers of God Gather. And this is, a lofty summit, the tomb of Mullah Abdul-Salam Mashish and Jebel Alam. And when I was putting this together, I actually do believe that sometimes the tomb of a great saint can be a Zāwiyah. Because of the way, because of the kind of people that gather there and visit there. It's almost like a Zāwiyah without a structure. I said about this, there are many great ones who are buried in remote, obscure places around the world. And when I visited them, I often felt it was a meeting of a kind. Mullah Abdul-Salam Mashish is one of those whose station is well known, as he was the master and the founder of one of Islam's greatest spiritual traditions, Sheikh Abu Hassan al-Shadli. When I visited Mullah Abdul-Salam's tomb at the top of Jebel Alam in the 1970s, the only way to get there was to walk or hire mules from the village at the base of the mountain and ride slowly up to the summit. That journey would take most of the day, and it definitely felt like a pilgrimage. You would experience a metaphysical change from the trek. At the summit, where Mullah Abdul-Salam ibn Mashish lies buried, a bare, cooked-floored plateau overlooks a wide vista of the surrounding mountain peaks. A great tree grows out of his small white mausoleum, its bare branches stretching in countless directions, at once reaching heavenward and bending down to wrap the tomb in a protective embrace. The raw energy of the scene is breathtaking. We decided to spend the night at the top of the mountain, sleeping on the court next to the mausoleum. As the cold night descended, I realized that I was going to freeze. So I pushed myself close to the wall of the Sheikh's resting place. I experienced a warmth coming from the tomb that I cannot explain. But even now, decades later, the experience is as real today as it was then. When the sun rose the next day, the plateau was draped with a warm yellow light. And as you look across the summit, the corkboard floor ends abruptly before a sheer drop of thousands of meters, leaving a vast openness between you and the distant peaks. Now you can get up there, in a couple of hours. There's a road now that goes all the way up, so the visit is made easier. I also believe that some great people's houses could be considered their Zāwiyah. Sidi Ismail Filali Baba is a muqaddam of the Da'il Qaraat. I first heard about Sidi Ismail from a friend who recounted a story that during a large gathering of what Shabistar refers to as the tavern dwellers, she began to wonder where her husband and friends were. Quick as a flash and without being asked, Sidi Ismail, while standing and leading the dhikr on the other side of the room, turned and pointed to them. Many tell similar stories about him. Without doubt, he is a man of God, constantly rooted in remembrance and presence. An illustrious notable of Fez, he lives in a traditional home centered around an open-air courtyard that overlooks the gardens of the Moroccan king's favorite hotel in the old city. A tanner by trade, he is the deputy of the path of Imam Muhammad al-Jazuli, the author of the world-famous Da'il Qaraat, a lengthy poem in praise of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which can take over 3 hours to recite. He recites it every day. And it says in there, and if you see the ego controlling you, and it comes to lead you into the fire of desires, banish its desires by continuous blessings on the Prophet. There is nothing to compare with the Da'il Qaraat. With the Da'il Qaraat, you must be firm. Read it to obtain your wishes. Lights appear and blaze thereby. My brother, it should never be neglected. That's from Imam Muhammad al-Jazuli. On the working trip to Fez, Sidi Ismail invited us to lunch, and we arrived with more people than he expected. I was working at that time, and I had a driver and ministry officials with me, but nothing ever phases Sidi Ismail. 10 fuqara from the desert had just begun reciting the Da'il Qaraat, so Sidi Ismail attended to everyone's needs while leading the recital. Our government officials did not expect this, but slowly they began to sway and everyone's spirits harmonized. 3 hours later, the most sumptuous meal was served. For the rest of our journey and all the way to the airport, our conservatively suited ministry driver would ecstatically call out Allah at the top of his voice. I think within a few hours, he'd been completely overwhelmed. And also I would include Hajj Muhammad, the blind Wali of Batlil's house. That also was like a Zāwiyah. He lived in a very small village outside of Fez. No one in that village knew of the spiritual significance of their neighbor, a saintly man who had 52 sheikhs and teachers, his last being Sidi Muhammad ibn Habib. After his Habib passed away, Hajj Muhammad never left his house. The moon in the desert, Sidi Sheikh, Tinjded. In the desert of Morocco, they called Sidi Sheikh the moon. Sidi Sheikh ruled the small oasis of Tinjded, a stronghold of the Daqawi Fuqara, so feared by the French during the colonial times that the French army once confiscated all their books of learning. Sidi Sheikh's Zāwiyah is situated next to the tomb of the famed spiritual master Sidi Mu'in al-Arabi, in the heart of the serene oasis of date palms and mud dwellings. The Sheikh, always a perfect host to visitors, travelers, supplied your every need, be it lunch, a place to sleep, or a donkey to transport your goods from the weekly market. Seeing the respect Sidi Sheikh's noble figure commanded as he rode his white horse through the town was an extraordinary lesson in leadership, ennobled by humility, compassion, and deep care for his people. In 2007, some 35 years after our original journey, we revisited the Zāwiyah of Sidi Sheikh in Tinjded. Miraculously, the oasis remained unchanged, a timeless reminder of his extraordinary past. I was going to visit the tomb of Sidi al-Arabi, who had been one of the teachers of Sidi Muhammad Habib. Sidi Sheikh had passed away since I was last in Morocco, and he now lies buried in a simple grave near Sidi al-Arabi's mausoleum. And this was the Mud Zāwiyah in Kalamaguna, which is the rose-growing region in South Morocco. And this house just blew me away. It was a mud palace owned by 4 brothers. And I did this picture of Imam Hussein and his son. And many years later, some 45 years later, with a group of students during one of our photographic workshops, I took them to revisit it. I wanted to see this room. I wanted to see whether it still existed. And strange thing was, it did exist. The rest of the whole Sar, crumbled back into the earth, but that room where they did dhikr still existed. And maybe all the remembrance of God made that room, made in that room, kept it standing. This is the old tomb of a saint in the graveyard in Turuk, the region of the Tafilala. The one who believed he was nothing, but was in reality a shining sun, Sidi Muhammad al-Qushi. So, while his beloved master, Sidi Muhammad Habib, was alive, Sidi Muhammad al-Qushi would sleep outside his room, ready to serve him at any time. So he was living in the Zāwiyah all the time, and just was ready to serve the Sheikh whatever he needed. After Sidna Sheikh's passing, Sidi Muhammad Habib hid himself far away in the desert, growing dates and serving the fuqara. I once went with a delegation to confirm the belief that he had inherited the mantle of Sidi Muhammad Habib, hoping to take instruction and guidance from him. His reply was not what we expected. He said, "I'm not a sheikh, I'm not a faqih, I'm not a deputy sheikh." He exclaimed, "I'm nothing, leave me alone." His reply secretly confirmed to me his high station. He then proceeded to look after us and feed us, humbly standing to the side while discreetly conducting those serving us. We sang poems under the stars, and when the evening ended, there were rose-scented sheets spread out for us to sleep. He woke us up before dawn, offering warm water to prepare us for the prayer. He then proceeded to serve us breakfast, made many prayers for us, and sent us on our way. For 35 years, a passport photograph, this image, was the only picture I had of Sidi Muhammad Habib. He did not like to be photographed, not because he believed it was wrong, but because he never liked anything that might exalt him above others. In 2007, I returned to visit Sidi Muhammad al-Qushi. He was now 102 years old and quite frail, but I secretly hoped to get the long-awaited photograph of him. At a time when the ego is everything, meeting someone completely free of this phenomenon is like a miracle, and I wanted to document it. After flying to Marrakesh, we made the long 11-hour drive through the Atlas Mountains to arrive at his Zāwiyah. When I consulted his sons about taking their father's picture, they reminded me that he did not like to be photographed. They said that if I asked, he would refuse, and they did not offer any solution to my dilemma. I told them about a similar situation in Syria where the Sheikh had said, "Don't ask, just do it." The sons laughed at my situation. After greeting the Sheikh, I sat down. One of the young Moroccans I had traveled with encouraged me to take the picture right away, but this was not the authorization I had long hoping for, and I did not wish to offend the Sheikh. Perplexed, I eventually lifted the camera and took a photo, but my heart was pounding. Throughout the evening, whenever I gathered the courage, I would take a picture, accepting that it might turn out to be absolutely unusable. Apart from anything else, the lighting was particularly unflattering. In the end, 3 shots turned out fine. They were not the wonderful, well-lit photographs I had hoped for, but somehow they were perfect. And he died about 3 years after that. And finally, I'm going to conclude with this, which is another Zāwiyah that I visited in Libya. I called Sheikh Mohammed al-Futuri in Benghazi, the one the light meter could not read. Sheikh Mohammed al-Futuri Hamouda was a disciple of Sheikh Ahmed Mustafa al-Alawi of Mustagano, one of the 20th century's great spiritual masters. My visit to Sheikh al-Futuri in Libya in 1975 was an intense experience. When I arrived at Tripoli airport, I saw my luggage come out on the wrong carousel, too far away for me to reach, and then disappear through the curtains, never to emerge again. Stripped of all my possessions, other than the clothes on my back and my camera, I made my way to the Sheikh's Zāwiyah. There were no pictures at all in this austere interior, except a simple divine name of God painted on the wall. All the fuqah around the Sheikh remembered God continuously calling out his name in everything they did. All they ever said was Allah. I don't remember having any light conversation or small talk with anyone at all. I had never been anywhere so intense where people were evoking the divine name all the time. When I went to photograph the Sheikh in his room, I was worried that there might not be enough light. As I looked through the lens at the frail old saint in front of me, the light meter needle started rocking widely back and forth between not enough light and too much light, and it wouldn't settle. The Sheikh was sitting quietly, waiting for me to take the picture. Finally, confounded by the strange light reading, I decided to go ahead and take the picture anyway. In the spirit of the Zāwiyah, I invoked God's name in a whisper, praying that the photograph would come out all right. As you can see, it did. To conclude, we now return back to the Zāwiyah of Sidi Imam Habib, and the qasida that was always sung at the end of any gatherings there. How many blessings you have bestowed upon me, and you continue to be generous and kind towards me. You nourished me while I was yet a fetus in the womb, and you were with me before my two parents. You created me a Muslim, and were it not for your grace, I would not know the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I prostrate in truth upon my forehead, yes, and my cheeks and eyes. O Lord, shower blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as long as the oft repeated surah is recited, and his family and companions, as well as long as the people profit from faith. I ask Allah the truth, that happiness might come to all those who live in this my time. Thank you. Sorry if it was too long.
Jazakumullah khair, Sidi. Not at all. Thank you. It was really such a pleasure to have you share that with us.
Alhamdulillah.
There's so much to reflect on. And inshallah, we look forward to opening the floor to Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please either feel free to raise your hand. I think there's a function in Zoom, you could raise your hand, or you can feel free to send a message in the chat. And just to get us started, Sidi, I'd love to ask you a question myself while we wait for some questions to come in. You know, I was sat reflecting while you were walking us through these, mashallah, these illuminating individuals. And it almost feels, maybe for me, like a different world, even though maybe, you know, it wasn't too long ago, but it does feel like a world away. And I'm sure that maybe some others can relate to that. And I just wonder, you know, the concept of the Zāwiyah is interesting, and I think you elaborated on it well. You know, a gathering for remembrance and for worship, and to uplift one another in this path, I suppose. So, I mean, from your perspective, how would you see the Zāwiyah as it pertains to today's world? You know, what are we missing, and how can we take the concept of the Zāwiyah, in your opinion, to befit our current context and the world we currently live in, even though it's changed so much?
I think definitely, as I said earlier, that the Zāwiyah is a sacred space. One of my teachers calls them a thin place, which is a very interesting description, meaning that like Mecca or Medina, usually the sheikhs choose these places, and there is wisdom in the places they choose to build their Zāwiyahs. But I think usually they are a thin place, meaning that the other worlds are how can you say, more easy accessible, if you can say such a thing in this modern world. It's something to do with the where they are, that they are, the other world is accessible. And if you remember God in those places, things are more likely to happen. You know, and probably some people will question that, whether it's true or not. But I do believe it. And it's in those places where if you are in the right state, you can understand things about yourself and about the path. And obviously, as I said, there are the abode of the sheikhs. So when Sidi Mohammed Habib was alive, he used to come down every afternoon after Asr. And Sidi Hamid would, as I said, would recite Quran. And then Sidi Mohammed Habib would do tafsir on the ayats of Quran recited. And he did that, you know, when he was there in his Zāwiyah, particularly during Ramadan. So it's the places where people are working on themselves, practicing things together, and also under the observance of their teacher.
Have there been any other documented instances regarding the phenomena mentioned with the light meter reading? Interesting. What do you believe caused this? Do you think the Sheikh was emitting or projecting, reflecting a higher light frequency? MashaAllah.
You know, I don't like to look into these things because, you know, that I'm just explaining the experience. Allahu Alam, I don't know. It was just my experience. You know, was it a test for me, you know, to just, I mean, the same with Sidi Mohammed Habib. When I did that picture, it troubled me for years because I don't remember there being any light in that room. And, you know, and I was so overwhelmed by the Sheikh's presence that, you know, again, it was for me a miracle that those pictures came out. I don't know. Allahu Alam, that's what I can say, really.
Yes, we have a question from Siti Aisha Gray Henry. Please go ahead.
What a beautiful talk, my dear brother. And when Hamza asked you that question about here we are out at this world,
Yeah,
and here is the Zāwiyah, and I think how many times one could sit in a Zāwiyah and be thinking something in the world. So the Zāwiyah would have to align with one's own heart and be carried with you at all times. And then I was thinking about the word Zāwiyah, corner. I don't really have Arabic or anything, but in the early 80s, I was in Moscow when every mosque and church was bolted shut and you couldn't mention religion. And I was within a museum with the guide, and there was a painting of a person lying on a little cot with a little lamp hanging here. And someone had died, a peasant. And she said, these are our red corners. In the house, we have a corner. And of course, red was equated with spiritual beauty. And of course, it became red army, red everything, right? And so there it was, the little corner. So I'm asking you, I'm sure you've talked to people about the etymological breakdown of corner or Zāwiyah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think maybe it's an extension of what the mihrab is. You know, it's a space that we go into to try and to remember God. I mean, I have a small room in my house which is a library, but it's you know, we use it for prayer. And I think it's important if you can create, if you have enough space in your room, even to create something in your own home, because it brings a lot of barakah, it brings a kind of calmness to the house, and it's a point of reference for us. And I think, as you're speaking, maybe that Zāwiyah is an extension of our own heart, if it is a place that we refer to connect with God in, you know. So that's why when I was doing this presentation, I thought, well, you could say the tomb of Mullah Abdul-Salam Mashish is a Zāwiyah. You could say the homes of Sidi Ismail is a Zāwiyah because of what goes on there. It's not a place where worldly stuff goes on. It's really a place where people remember God. And I think and mosques are slightly different because mosques are more for everybody. But I think really the Zāwiyah is really for people who have dedicated their lives or on a particular spiritual path where they are working on themselves, trying to improve themselves and, you know, make themselves better people. So I think it's hard to pin it just to a place, but they are. The Zāwiyah is very common throughout the world and much harder to find these days, I think. Maybe they should be reintroduced, really.
I was thinking too that the beautiful faces of the awliya and the saintly beings you showed, people of the Zāwiyah, each of them in their own way, mostly, I mean, all were representing the qualities of the heart Zāwiyah, their humility, their utter trust, you know, their focus. I mean, everyone, the women and men. So in a way, they are the living Zāwiyahs, you know, they're what the state of being they're in, which is the state we're all after, you know?
Exactly.
So we have
very lucky to have those experiences. I think it's, you know, I really felt that was the end of something, you know, that his Zāwiyah and the kind of people that existed. I mean, maybe there still are, I don't know. There are places in the world I haven't been to, but maybe they still exist. I don't know.
Thank you, Sidi. We have a question that came in through the chat. I'll read it out loud. What needs to be done to recreate the concept of the Zāwiyah? Hang on, it's a two-pronged question. It's from the same person. Excuse me. So the first part of the question is interested to know more about your path into photography and the choice of the characters that you photographed. And the second part of the question from the same participant was also what needs to be done to recreate the concept of the Zāwiyah to encourage the youth to learn about the essence of Islam. Beautiful. And for more open, regular scholarly debate. Bismillah.
I think, you know, my photography has always followed my own kind of path, really. It's never been about earning money. It's just like it kind of enabled me to just travel and visit parts of the world that I was interested in. And so I've sort of turned down a lot of things in my life, which probably could have made a lot of money, but this was my kind of passion. And then having that experience in the Zāwiyah in Magnes, which was a very profound experience, because it wasn't just, you know, they weren't all just kind of beggars. There were, you know, as you saw, Haji Lali, who was a businessman, but, you know, he was under his sheikh's teaching, and, you know, and he was ordered by his sheikh to feed 40 people every day, which he did. And then you have someone like Sidi Hamid, who was a civil servant, but in the Zāwiyah became like this intoxicated, beautiful singer. So I think I got shown something very special. And I think that always stayed with me. And as I traveled and met more saintly people, I always wanted to give something back, something back. Because I was fortunate enough to see these people and photograph them. Right? That's how Meetings of Mountains kind of evolved, really. What we have to do now, I think the Zāwiyah is a very important part of, you know, there are so few places. The mosque is something, and the mosque is for everybody, and really the mosque has its own structure. But I think for people that want more, we need places where people can just come and be, that offer more than just a place for people to pray. I mean, there should be places where people are fed, where somebody interested in Islam could come and sit with like-minded people. I mean, it is a kind of missing thing, I feel, at this time that we're living. And I think there's a need for it. I think there's so much confusion about Islam, and it needs to be explained from a spiritual viewpoint, because I think that's where we meet as human beings with everybody, whatever your deep religious beliefs are. I think spiritually and on a human level, we need to meet, and then we can share ideas. And so I really feel that the Zāwiyah is an important part of the picture, and we should think, where possible, to be able to create these places.
MashaAllah, thank you.
Sorry, and I just wanted to add, I think also that mosques have become slightly political, and these, you must remember, the Zawiya is a non-political space, and that's a very important thing. We need non-political spaces to be able to talk. We don't need to argue with people, or, it's not about winning the argument. It's really about being together and sharing food and being together. And I think that's what seems to be the message now for this time, is to bring people together.
SubhanAllah. Thank you for that response. I think we have time for 2 more questions. We have a comment and also a question from another participant. So they said, thank you for transporting us through your photographs and mesmerizing words, inshallah. Can people create a Zāwiyah and invite scholars to visit, or can only scholars create Zāwiyahs?
No. I think that's a great idea, and the purpose of the Zāwiyah is that you create the space and then you invite people to come and speak to them, and that's what they should be used for.
We have a question that came through privately that's asking, any example of contemporary Zāwiyahs today that are addressing contemporary challenges?
That's interesting. I mean, I was just shown by a friend of mine in China, a good friend of mine, and he showed me a picture of it. There's a wealthy Muslim businessman who has donated this apartment. And it's beautiful. It's really clean. It was, beautiful calligraphy. It was. They had a small kitchen, and they've created it just so that Muslims can come together and sit and be together and study together. And I thought it was really interesting that now is sort of appearing in somewhere like China, So that was interesting. I've heard of other Zāwiyahs being created in Spain and where else. It's obviously easier where either someone has a property or can afford it, because property is so of a premium. So it's much harder in places like in the West. But I definitely I've always wanted to try and have somewhere, but it's it's in places like UK and probably America, it's quite financially difficult. But I think if there are people who have a place that's just dormant, maybe that could be designated as a Zāwiyah, as long as it's set up properly, in a proper structure, and it's a place really just for spirituality and not for political gains, or a bit like I guess mosques used to be. I remember sitting Habib Ahmed, somebody said they wanted to build a mosque, and Habib Ahmed Mashur Haddad, and he said to them, and how will you feel if your name isn't on that mosque? And the man said, I wouldn't be very happy. So Habib Ahmed said, then don't build it.
So we just had one more private question come in about the organization. So asking about where Shajarat al-Nur is based. Right now, this is just a sort of virtual collective. We're still trying to figure out a space, inshallah, to kind of settle the root, to establish the roots for the organization. But inshallah, we look forward to hosting many more events just like this. And thank you, Sidi Peter, so much for walking us through this beautiful journey through these characters, through these beautiful spaces, and just through your personal experiences. Jazakumullah khair. Before we wrap up, we also wanted to give you the floor just to speak about your upcoming project. We're aware you have a book, that you're finalizing your book. If I'm not mistaken, the title is Heaven, Earth, and the 10,000 Things, the Lives of the Muslims in China. Could you speak to us a bit about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, again, I never do short-term projects. I first heard about Muslims in China in the 1970s, and I heard there were Muslims in China and Russia, and I remember thinking, how is that possible? Because at that time, I thought Muslims were only in Arabia and maybe Malaysia or Pakistan or something. But when I heard there were Muslims in China, and as far as Russia, I wanted to meet them, and I wanted to know what their lives were like, and how does that fusion work with someone who's Chinese and a Muslim, you know, how, and so I kind of really was, and whenever I found any books or anything about them or a magazine article, I would just sort of devour them. But you couldn't go to Russia in that time. I mean, sorry, you couldn't go to China, you couldn't go to parts of Russia at that time also. But it took up to about 2000 before China started opening up. And then I was able to do a small trip where I went to Beijing, Xi'an, and Inner Mongolia. And then I met Haj Nuruddin, and we talked about possibility of doing a project together. And he just said to me, like, if you buy your tickets, I will help you and I'll organize it. And we did, I did 4 trips in total. One trip took about 6 or 7 weeks. We went from Beijing all the way to Kashgar and back again. And I went north and south, and we explored where the first, as we believe, Sahaba, or Sayyid Abi Waqqas is considered the first person to go to China. And he was invited by the Tang emperor, as far as we understand. And there were various other people from Medina that went and established Islam. And because of who they were, because of their moral uprightness, their honesty, and they were genuine people, they were accepted and allowed to build their own places of worship and keep their Muslim names and dress as they wished. And I love this model of how Islam went there. It was not by the sword. It was purely on those early ambassadors. And I think you have to remember China at that time was already very sophisticated. So there was this meetings of minds. And what we discovered in the Ming dynasty was that there were 2 scholars Muslim scholars who got together and said, there's no way that we can teach Islam to the Chinese unless we study Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, which they did. And then they said, but the Chinese don't understand Arabic, so they had to develop this whole language of describing God. So they described God as the most high or the most real. There wasn't a concept of prophets in the Chinese culture, so they used the word sages. So the Prophet ﷺ was the great sage. They referred to the Quran as the great classic. There wasn't an understanding of the word iman, belief. So they used the word clear light. And this was a language that the Chinese could understand. And therefore, when they taught about Islam, it wasn't considered a threat, but it was considered a continuation of what they already believed. And during the Ming dynasty, Islam really spread. Some say even the Ming emperor became a Muslim. And in my book, he wrote a 100-word poem in praise of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there was an English translation of it, but I wasn't very happy with it. And so Dr. Murata, Shikito Murata, the great Japanese scholar that wrote the Tao of Islam, I said to her, would you retranslate it? And she said, yes, if you find me a proper Chinese version of it. And I had a photograph of it carved into a stone tablet and she retranslated it, and it's in the book. And really, when I read that, I wept. I learned so much from that poem. It was really beautiful. And I think when you understand Islam through the Chinese eyes, you understand a lot of things. I'm saying personally, I understood a lot of things I didn't understand before. And that's why I feel so passionately about this. I think it's very important. And we need to teach it to our children, really. This is a very important story.
MashaAllah, thank you so much. And before we wrap up, we have some, mashallah, beautiful comments coming through in the chat. We had someone mention that a heart that is filled with Allah is the first step, and Allah takes care of the rest, in reference to, how to recreate the concept of the Zāwiyah. Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah.
And we also have a comment from Sidi Ajmal Maharaj. Listening to this wonderful talk fills my mind of how similar this town of Ajmer has had a mystical culture, which I have documented through art like your photographs, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you all so much for attending. And
Well, thank you.
And thank you, Sidi Peter, so much once again. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a beautiful platform you've created, really. It's so important at this time, these platforms, really. It's essential. There's a lot of pressure, people under a lot of stress these days, a lot of anxieties, and we need to just remember that God is our creator. He's taking care of us, and we need to trust, and we need to learn to trust in the process.
Inshallah. Thank you for the kind reminder, and thank you for inspiring everyone here, I hope. And if anyone wants to just stay in touch with Shajarat al-Nur and the organization's future events, we've posted something in the chat. So if you just, you can find the website, social media, and also we post these discussions on YouTube. This is being recorded, and inshallah, this will be available to record, to share in the soon enough. And just wanted to say Eid Mubarak to everybody. تقبل الله صيامكم إن شاء الله, and السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد السابق للخلق نوره ورحمة للعالمين ظهوره عدد من مضى من خلقك ومن بقي ومن سعد منهم ومن شقي صلاة تستغرق العد وتحيط بالحد صلاة لا غاية لها ولا منتهى ولا انقضاء صلاة دائمة بدوامك وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما مثل ذلك.